And it's actually an honor for me to be part of the HSC Connect webinars, as usual. We can go to the presentation, please, Fabian. The last minute risk assessment presentations or trainings as well that we provide is our review and research over the last, I would say, 15 years, being in the Middle East on, dealing with multiple nationalities, the dialect, the culture differences, to find how can we improve this last minute risk assessment. And that's why you'll see we use the traffic light as an indicator. And it's one of the tools that we used in terms of reviewing our performance at site and actually showcasing using this traffic light. So I'll be talking a bit about that more later on. Next, please, Fabian. Next, we've had the intro. Okay, so just a bit of an overview in terms of this. Some of the areas we'll cover is the understanding of the last minute risk assessment philosophy, why the last minute risk assessments are necessary and when they should be conducted. We'll provide guidance on the factors, but looking at the size of the group, I'd like us to have a more of a discussion than like me presenting out on these. You can actually stop me. We'll do questions there and then as well. And this is key for us. Review the different types of tools, methods of last minute risk assessments. There's various names. And then also a key one for us is outline roles and responsibilities. So who should be actually guiding and leading teams through a last minute risk assessment? And then raise awareness and promote the use of LMRAs proactively. And the important areas to eliminate hazards and prevent injuries. Next slide, please. Okay, so barriers, if you look at our study, we looked at the various barriers that precede the incident. And famous for us was our formal risk assessments at project level. We developed a whole set of procedures and plans. We developed work control systems like the work permit to work system. We had pre-task discussions. We set up JHA's job safety analysis, whether you call it a job hazard analysis. And in some legal terms, it's a risk assessment that's actually attached to the required method statement. But our biggest gaps came in terms of the final element, and this was the pre-task personal planning. So we spent, and if you look at incidents, and this started from investigating incidents, you'll find that all the necessary controls and these protective barriers are in place. So one of the key ones for us was, why are we not getting it right? And this took us a lot of questioning, soul searching. We had all, been involved in projects, been involved in the planning, but coming back to, are we getting the workers engaged in this process enough? And this led us to a series of intervention programs. We held workshops with teams. We also did a perception survey on this in terms of, are we doing a thorough job of engaging others at the pre-task level, and what should the program look like? Next, please, Fabian. So in order for us to establish this, we had a number of workshops where we went through these definitions, and for the interest of time, most of us are familiar with these, but we wanted to have a definition on the LMRA process, on the last minute risk assessment process, because when we did our reviews, when we did our workshops, our perception surveys, nobody actually could put a definition for the last minute risk assessments. So this was carefully thought. It was a personal risk assessment. So by adding the word personal, you were attaching yourself to the process, the individual, and more important, the word prior to performing a specific task. Okay. Another key element for us was engaging, as I mentioned earlier, on one of the projects where this was kicked off on. We had over 30,000 workforce. We had over 25 nationalities, right? And 25 nationalities on a project of that size within, for example, in the guys that came from India, they had various other dialects spoken. And at that time, when doing our projects, we also had a major shortage of people that could understand and speak English at the craft level. So this was a major challenge for us. Next, Fabian. Okay, so we also wanted to look at just an overview of the last minute risk assessments. So it's a method of hazard recognition, and it's used through your observations, what you've observed. It identifies and corrects unsafe conditions. This also changed a bit, where we were also looking at safe observations. So where we could actually promote safe behaviors and job practices. So we started off looking and correcting unsafe conditions, right? And as we progress, we focused more on the strengths of safe behaviors. It was also a review to look at task requirements and more important, challenges. The task requirements, the tools need, and the challenges also took us to another level where we saw gaps in our supervisory training. So we had to equip our supervisors with the necessary tools, etc. It's also served as a no-go, no-go indicator. As I mentioned, the traffic light system in terms of can the job progress or not. And for us, this was one of the major turning points on the projects in terms of using this go or no-go. It was a concept that even some of our supervisors couldn't come to terms with. We've got a deadline, we have critical phases of the project, but by implementing this and getting it to the level of the workers, it was a major success and a turning point on not just the safety culture, but just in terms of how we improved a lot of our processes. Okay. This was another area when it was introduced, it wasn't a written document. But when we looked at tracking in terms of the behaviors and, in terms of those persons that could be recognized as champions, as the program grew, we then started a documentation process. Okay. Next. Can the guys just mute their mics? Okay, so these are just the 6 principles of the last minute risk assessment process, where it's basically a step back process. And a key learning for us is when we presented it first, it was a pre-task discussion, and later on evolved even to during the task and post-task. So this is key for us, right? It allowed you to scan your work environment. If the work environment changes and you're not comfortable, we introduced the stop work program where the workers could actually stop a job. Also raising the alarm bells in terms of what could be the worst things that can happen. In terms of reviewing the potential consequences. For example, we had a series of dropped objects. We had some heavy lifting, critical lifting going on at various parts of the project. And these were key discussions that we had with the work teams. A key one also was evaluating the barriers for hazards. And a major learning from us was risk mitigation. How could we improve on this? Another key lesson was stopping and asking for support. There's various cultural breakdowns that we had to go through in terms of, breaking down this macho image of, if I ask for help, it will show that I'm weak. Or, if I stop a job or if I ask for assistance, it means that I don't know what I'm doing. So we allowed for this to be developed and improve. And we actually were surprised with some of the older guys that had been on these projects way before some of the new guys, where we saw this open communication as well develop. And then again, if you look at some of the challenges we had in terms of heat, the high heat temperature, the exposures to heat stress, etc., where supervisors were actually making the call, in terms of, although they had met all the requirements to work, after dialogue with the workers, they were feeling fatigued. And they would actually stop the work, review it again. Okay. Are there any questions just before we go to the next slide? Okay, next, Fabian. Okay, so one of the key areas for us was in terms of measuring the effectiveness of the last minute processes that were in place. We established some changes in terms of our training. We had a very high percentage of senior level people trained on hazard recognition, but we found that our middle tiers, our supervisor, foreman, charge and gang leaders, and some of our worker champions weren't actually trained. So we had to go back and start a training process for them. And then we also developed a number of quality checks. And that's why I mentioned that we had to include a documented process so we could then have the assessments done correctly in terms of, for example, senior management engaged in last minute risk assessments, using a scorecard to measure the effectiveness of and efficiency of the last minute risk assessment process. A key one for us was also a measurement of the communication level in terms of the two-way process. And I purposely am now going to the tools. In terms of some of our contractors had strong tools that they already came on board with in terms of the terminology that they use, step back, 5x5, etc. So we didn't want to change that we allowed them to use their own processes that they were familiar, and we adapted our quality checks, the training, and we actually learned a lot from engaging our contractors, our subcontractors, etc., by taking some of their learnings there as well. The key for us was, over a project phase, how do you sustain this process? So we had a very strong coaching system, mentoring process, where we actually had it linked to a recognition program. So in most cases, we found that, for example, charge and foreman worker level were not being recognized as how our supervisors were. So we opened that to in terms of ensuring that the workers, charge and foreman levels, were given that same recognition at the same events for this. Okay. We also had a very strong site presence of immediately recognizing good performers in terms of task teams, etc. And this was where we changed in terms of recognizing safe behaviors. We had a shift by developing the last minute risk assessment process. We also had a change in how we did our behavior-based safety observations. So there was a major link in terms of these two, where we also noticed that our behavior-based safety process, we were policing rather than recognizing, showing positive recognition in terms of safe work, rather than looking at the negatives. And it had a very strong improvement, not just on performance, but on the process, overall effectiveness of the process. Okay. Now, I've just moved quite swiftly through those slides. Are there any questions that the guys have? Fabian, we can go to the group. We can keep this, the presentation, and then if the guys have any queries or questions on this.
No problem. Good evening, everybody. Please unmute your mics.
Hi, it's Mervyn speaking. Is that the full presentation?
Yes, yes.
Okay, well done.
I've shortened it down because of it being a webinar, and I wanted a more interactive session.
All right, thanks. That's excellent. What I must congratulate you on is also, you said the definitions. I came in a bit late. Sorry about that. The definition, the change of the definition and the wording, excellent. I think making it a personalized approach on that. Very well done, Mansur.
Thanks. Yeah,
thank you,
Mervyn, just on that, this is key for us. We, on projects, even outside of projects with our current COVID scenarios, we have all this definitions and terminology that's used, but we don't take time to actually engage, and I call them stakeholders, our workers, in terms of what do they mean, is there an understanding? And this took us a number of workshops, engagement sessions, and we actually recognized the group that came up with this as well.
I must say thank you very much for that, because it's an excellent presentation, and also much due to the actual definitions around it and personalizing it. It's excellent. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mervyn. Do you have any other comments, any other questions that we'd like to discuss? Please, it's an open forum, so please feel free to share any comments, any pearls on this topic? We'll be interested to hear from you guys.
We have iPhone that's open.
Is that me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I also came in late. Are we talking about like the DSTI, the last minute risk assessment? Is that like your DSTI that gets done on site?
Correct.
With the
correct.
contractors?
Who are we talking to?
Sorry, you're speaking to Chantel.
Hi, Chantal. Yes.
And I found
DSTI.
it very informative because I was working for one of the principal contractors on site, and I found that a lot of the subbies didn't know, the supervision didn't know how to fill out DSTI. Because we used to doing risk assessment, so we know what a DSTI looks like, but they didn't. And what you're saying makes so much sense in terms of coaching, because I found myself coaching every day because you go on site, you check their DSTIs, and they're clueless. You know, so I feel like right from the beginning of the stage, I think on induction, we need to have like a coaching session where you get all your foremen and your supervision together to actually teach them how to fill out a DSTI. Because you find on site, most of the safety officers are doing the DSTIs for the guys.
Very
You see
good
now.
point.
So when you have a site with all these subbies, especially I found in civils, these guys, they've never, in fact, most of the time, they're not on a big site where they have to do all the safety stuff, where they have to do DSTIs and they have to update safety files. They are totally clueless. So I found that a lot of coaching was needed, and I think we need to introduce that in the beginning stage on induction, teach them how to use DSTIs, tell them about the safety file, what it's about, because a lot of them don't even know what's in there. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chantal.
Thank you.
That's true.
Chantal, if I can just add, so one of the gaps you'll find is our training needs prior to commencement of the projects. A lot of focus is and attention is on our inductions, but we don't actually do a proper needs and assessment of in terms even of our subcontractors. So for example, a subcontractor is awarded a contract, we should have some measurements of those persons prior to being mobilized.
Absolutely.
And for example, if you look at the barriers, 99% of the time we spend more energy and time on the formal risk assessments that's attached to your occupational health and safety plan. We spend a lot of energy on writing these lovely procedures. And I know on one of the projects that I did a cold eye review on, the contractor had to give the engineer, I think it's 16 plans, one of them being the occupational health and safety plan, prior to actually turning soil. Okay. However, if you look at a number of documents at the work front, at the job area, it's very limited. And we need to have a review of, are we in the business just to create mountains of paperwork, or are we in the business to prevent incidents and protect people from being injured? And this was it was a major wake-up call for us, you know, because we also had our head in the sand, where we were basically looking more at our documentation that the contractor, the EPCs had to develop, and not looking at the differences, the impacts at a site level. Secondly, in terms of training, looking at supervisor charge hands, I highly recommend workshops. And I think Damien is going to be having a presentation next week that speaks largely in terms of moving the way we look at safety. You know, it's for me, it's long overdue. And I like what you mentioned in terms of, for example, DSTIs. If it's not done by the crew with the charge and foreman supervisor, then the job shouldn't proceed. You know, that's the level we should be at a project level. The safety officer, which I don't like the word officers, the advisors, should be there to support the process. And unfortunately, globally, we still find a lot of our safety professionals actually doing these risk assessments. And in one of our webinars during the week, we actually found that the safety officer or safety manager does even the formal risk assessment. The site safety teams prepare the pre-task risk assessment, okay, whether it's a JSA, JHA, etc. And now what you mentioned now is so true, where the safety teams are performing the pre-task, the DSTI, etc. So there's no engagement, no input at all. Thank you for that.
Sorry, thank you, Chantal. I was on mute there.
No problem.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Any other comments pertaining to last-minute risk assessments or pertaining to risk assessments as well? Please feel free. Any challenges that you're faced with? Any areas that we could possibly advise on or share an experience on? Please feel free.
Fabian, just while we wait for some to respond, for me, this is another area that we faced with it. Since we've been doing webinars, I've also asked a lot of the safety professionals to speak out. You know, we had one with the World Safety Organization during this week. And I must say, I've been doing these for many years in terms of presentations, etc. But I found with webinars, there's a lot more voice now. People are speaking out. So I would encourage HSE Connect members, those that are participating in these, to express the challenges. And I wish I had some form of recognition for Chantal, for her being the first one to speak out, and Mervyn as well.
Okay, any comments from anybody? Please feel free. Unmute your mic and you can share.
So,
okay, so in case there's nobody that's would like to share.
Fabian,
Yes, go ahead.
if you don't mind just clarifying, you know, when you talk about your baseline, the different types of risk assessments, right? So what should come from the site agent to the safety officer? So you still saying that, sorry. And then you create, can you give us a simple, explain it, because you know there's so many different names to these risk assessments. There's the baseline and there's the other one you use on site. So please, if you don't mind just clarifying so that I understand, because there's issue-based, there's baseline, you know, all these names, it can be very confusing.
correct. Fabian, you can go to the barrier preceding the incident slide, please. And just while Fabian gets there, it's a very important part where one understanding what's required and what should be actually going into from a project level. Two, you raise a valuable point or question in terms of the agent's role. Whoa. And for me, this is that's the one, Fabian. So for me, I like to simplify it. For example, the agent should be engaged at the formal risk assessment. So this is at project level. Okay, the formal risk assessment that's attached to your occupational health and safety plan. Okay.
Okay. So the client spec.
Sorry.
So that will come in with the client specification. You know, the agent comes in with the client to the principal contractor.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
so it comes from the top. So the formal risk assessment will come from the client to the principal contractor. Correct. With the HSE spec.
Correct.
Okay, so can you work it from the top all the way down to the bottom now to the subby?
Okay, so for me, as I've mentioned, most of our disconnects are what gets passed on to the subcontractors and their understanding and their own limitations of what's needed. So if you look at the slide, the subcontractor should also be developing their own risk assessment.
Of the formal risk assessment.
Of the formal risk assessment, based on what? Sorry?
Which would then, what would you call it? Would that be the baseline?
Yes, it's part of your baseline, your project baseline.
Okay.
So I'm just making a bit of a sketch. So you have your baseline. The key one for us now is linked to activities. And that's why I see a big gap in a lot of projects where even on procedures, their procedures are not linked to their work activities. They have this huge amount of documents that are not actually applicable to what they'll actually be executing. So it should be a process where you have a risk assessment, you actually understand your exposure areas based on using your RAM, your project specific risk assessment matrix. Okay. Then you started developing and aligning, linking your procedures, your planning to your risk assessment. That's what the risk assessment or risk-based approach is about. Your work permit system then looks at how far or what controls will be needed. And these, by the way, all play a part in establishing your training needs. So for example, even your formal risk assessment, how many activities are there? Who are the people linked to these activities? What training will they need? Because a lot of the mitigations here will talk of trained personnel prior to executing, etc. The normal terminology you get in your mitigations. Okay, your pre-task then will link the top three. Okay, it will link these in terms of the task specific. Okay, and your pre-task should also be done. So for example, you spoke of a contractor or subcontractors, and I'm using, for example, a civil project. So I have a contractor that's doing our roads, the infrastructure part. I have a contractor that's doing buildings and all works associated with buildings. And then I have a electrical HVAC contractor. Okay. These three types of contractors should all be developing their pre-task planning, JSAs, JHAs, or risk assessments based on their specific activities. And this is another gap where if you go and you do incident reviews or you do gap assessments, you'll find a lot of the activities listed in the JSA or JHA or pre-task risk assessments have nothing to do with the actual activities. They normally cut and paste. Okay. Now, coming from the terminology that you all use in South Africa, or with reference to South Africa, you spoke of there being some challenges in the terminology. If you can just give us some examples of those.
I spoke about the DSTI. DSTI, the Daily Safety Task Instruction, so that you're right, it should be done on site based on the work. But you know, in civils, every day they're doing something different. So therefore, today there may be 3 on the DSTI, tomorrow there may be 10.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and everything changes. But for me, the question, what I need clarity on is the difference between the baseline and the issue-based. Because I'm always hearing the baseline risk assessment, the issue-based.
Yeah.
Maybe Fabian.
Can I jump in there quickly? Okay.
Yes, please.
All right. So 2 issues or 2 concerns around the baseline. So let me just go back a little bit before 2014's construction regulation change. So before that, every company had a baseline risk assessment that had to be done, which was the corporate high-level baseline risk assessment, considering all the activities based on the scope of work. So there was a project baseline risk assessment that was compiled, mostly by the contractor, the principal contractor, managing contractor, as well as the contractors themselves would have also had baseline risk assessments. Which should still be done today. There shouldn't be a difference and a change in that mentality, because a baseline risk assessment is your complete, let's say, library of risk assessments compiled together for that specific project and scope. So what you normally would do is utilize that for your desktop reviews when you're conducting your issue-based risk assessments. That is your go-to document, let's say, while you are compiling your specific issue-based risk assessment according to the activities that you are performing. So what happened is, after 2014, the Department of Labor made it a requirement that the client and the client's agent had to develop obviously the specification was already compiled by the client and then the client agent. And based on the specification, he also needed to compile a baseline project risk assessment. So that's where the current situation came in, Chantal, with the baseline risk assessment that is referred to, which you are talking about, which is normally given to us by the agent or client agent. Yeah, not a site agent. We must not get mixed up with the words or terminologies of a site agent, which is seen as a site manager, especially, etc. Especially in the civil environment, they talk about a site agent. This agent is talking about the PR agent, which is registered under SSCP-CMP. Okay, so they would compile the spec and they would compile the project baseline risk assessment, which is then issued to the principal contractor and the subcontractors. And based on that information, you would also compile your risk assessment based on the information provided from that document. So that's like it's the library.
So mine,
So
mine will be the issue-based.
So yes, yours would be an issue-based.
That's the baseline.
That's correct.
That comes from the PR agent. Okay.
That's correct. But again, it does not mean that we should not utilize our own baseline risk assessment, because it's still the core document that we should have. So in a way, in my opinion, it's actually brought in some how can I say, some mist and clouds in the air when it comes to companies having their own baseline, because now everyone says, no, but it's not our responsibility to have a baseline. It is the clients and the client's agent that need to provide the baseline. That is correct in the legal terminology or legal requirements, specifically under the requirements of the permit application to the Department of Labor for them to approve your permits, etc. But it does not mean that our companies should not have our own baseline risk assessment. Okay, so I'm just putting that out there for everybody. Right, so I hope that clarifies it. And then from that, sorry, from your baseline, you have your issue-based risk assessments, which are more your task-specific risk assessments.
That's your pre-task, yeah?
Yes, yes. And then from that, you would have what they call your continuous-based risk assessment, which is your DSTI, your JSAs, and all of those different document terminologies or type of templates that you get out there in the field. So that's the difference between the three that they refer to: the baseline, the issue-based, and the continuous-based risk assessment. Okay, that's it from my side.
Okay.
Thank you, Fabian.
Thank you.
Fabian, one more thing. Now,
Yes.
the PR agent, right? They
Yes.
approve the principal contractors' risk assessments, right? So, does the reason why we need the baseline is to get our one approved. Now, if our one is not in line with theirs, then they don't approve it. So therefore, you saying that we must have our own baseline. Yes, so you have your own baseline based on your company and what you'll do. But at the end of the day, you want it from the client so that it's in line, so that it can be approved, because he has to sign it off. Isn't that how it works?
I agree with you, Chantal, but the other thing that we need to take into consideration for is that majority of the baselines that clients issue to us are based on their scope. It's not based on the sub-subby's scope of works that is also being performed. So what happens is that you would get much more of a, let's say, a high-level baseline risk assessment, and I'm not going to refer to specific companies because I don't want to get in trouble if a couple of them hear this discussion. But some of the companies that you work for, even the big petrochemical companies, if you look at the quality of the baselines that they're issuing to us as the principal contractors, it's putrid, honestly. And because what they also focusing on, sometimes the actions don't even meet with the mitigations, or the risk and hazards don't meet with the mitigations that they've submitted to us. But because they're the clients and it's an approved document, we accept it and we work with it. So it does not mean that we cannot ensure that ours is better than theirs. First point. Second point is, many of the baselines, as I've mentioned to you, are cut, copy, paste, which means that one project scope that is something completely different to another project scope is utilized on another project scope by that same PR agent. So you're going to find a lot of disparities between it, and there's going to be a lot of gaps because what they've considered on a previous project might not be included in this project. But it's an accepted and approved document because why? The department is also not vetting these things properly. They're not checking, please send us your complete scope of works. Let us see what is part of the bill of the bill of quantities that is specified, etc., etc. You understand? So when they look at the documents and they say, oh, it's been approved by this, he's a PR agent or she's a PR agent, we've approved it on the previous projects, there should be no problem, then they issue the permit. That same document lands on your desk. You now need to compile a issue-based risk assessment based on all of the scope of works that you're performing, which a lot of the time will not be aligned with theirs. So I'm just letting you know that we must not rely heavily on those documents coming from the agents, many of them, and even from some of the petrochemical giants in South Africa. I've looked at some documents and it's laughable what they give us as baseline risk assessments. So yes, going back to your point, in a way, if your documentation is, if your risk assessments, etc., are, let's say, more or less aligned with their requirements, it should pass. A lot of the time, they're even shooting down risk assessments because they're not happy with the template. They're not happy with your baseline risk assessment template, and your matrix is different to theirs, and it's causing too much confusion. And that's rubbish. I've had this discussion. I'm telling you, Saide, I've had this discussion. Carry on.
No, sorry, guys. If I'm awarded a contract, why the hell do I need to report to an agent?
Yeah.
Sorry for my language, I've been in this business for 30 years. So no way do I report. Yes, there's, for example, if you look at UK legislation, they have engineers, or in some they'll have project management teams. You basically provide them this information as part of your contract in terms of review. You'll have a code A, code B, code C, for example, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But nobody tells you how you should be doing your job. That's why you've been awarded your job.
That's correct. And your system's been approved.
Yes.
Mm.
So one, my agent under the Occupational Health and Safety Construction Act should be an enabler, not a disabler.
Yeah,
Okay.
That's true.
So my agent should be part of my, whether you call it, and for me, this is what's killing industry. All these terms, keep it simple. The slide that I presented now is a very simple process. I have a formal risk assessment that takes care of my project, right? And I'm talking about a risk assessment that looks at occupational health and safety. I'm not looking at your risk assessment that deals with other parts, financial, etc. That's separate from this. So I have a formal risk assessment. My activities are there. Where are my exposures? My key areas that I need to look at. I then look at the pre-task, which you guys are calling now issue-based, right? Which, call it what it is. It's a pre-task document. It's not an issue-based document, right? It's a pre-task. Before I do a job, I need the following controls. Okay, because a project is dynamic, I need to ensure that there's some method of review that those controls in place. That's what I should be aiming for. And that's why you have this DSTI, etc. Okay. But the agent cannot stop your job. Mervin's hand is raised for a while. Let's hear from Mervin. But I love this. I love these points here, and I'd like to hear more of this, please.
Mervin, please go ahead. Mervin?
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. What I was just going to ask the lady, in which industry you in? You in the road, civil engineering, roads?
No, not roads, buildings.
Building, okay. The scope of work in your environment will determine exactly what specifications should be taken out from the main, what Fabian explained in terms of the principal contractor. Your scope of work will be building. Let's say you're only going to be doing a building. You're not doing roads. You're not doing mechanical work, you see? You're doing building. So how can you talk about what is looking at? Your principal contractor has probably shoved you with the baseline risk assessment, and they give you menial lines of saying, let's say for argument's sake, they talk about the trenching should be at this, they just talk about trenching, but they don't talk about the in-depth of that trenching. In other words, how deep should it go? How deep, what's the width of it, and so forth. That is where you come into play, all right? Where you specify, you are a specialist because you were already given the job, okay? Your company was given the job of doing the building only, all right? They were not given the building to do the electrical main board in the building. Maybe I'm just using that as an example, okay? And you are not given roads. So, but in your building, you must have some type of paving to wherever that building's going, or steps to that building, that wherever you're going. So you're going to have a little bit of documentation around there, the height, the width, and they tell you the steps. You must have a building, and this is what the building must comprise of, okay? But they don't go into depth in terms of the heights and so forth, in terms of the processes. Now, you need to take out that information. You're doing the building, you're doing the stoop of the particular building. I'm just using an example there, right? You need to customize it in terms of the specifications that you were given as well, right? Around how do you protect your people, all right, in doing the job safely of making sure that that stoop was built to the T, and that's it. Okay, it's got nothing to do with because they give you information on the electrical, right? They must give you a little bit. The cabling will be run 5 meters away from the building, kind of thing, or whatever the case may be. But that's not your concern. Your main concern is making sure that foundation is correct, making sure that the people that are building the foundation to build that building is doing it in a safe manner, whether they're excavating or whatever the case may be. So yes, the risk assessment around that baseline risk assessment of your company that's doing the building part of that project. Remember, your project is not only the building per se. The project is most probably a dam next to the building, maybe a bigger plant next to the building, electrical substation next to the building. So there's various parts, but your company was only given the building to do. Okay, so your specification would be based around your scope of work. All right, it's got nothing to do with the substation, but it's got to do with the actual building. How do you design? How do you make sure that your people are safe doing the work for that particular building? That's your scope of work.
Okay, sorry, Mervyn, sorry. So
Yep.
why would a agent kick back a risk assessment if it's my scope of work? And I wish we had agents on this platform, but I'm asking.
We got a few agents in our group. I must actually invite a few of them to
Please.
join.
So why would an agent kick? Because I'll immediately instigate claims, yeah? I'll instigate claims, which I've done in the past. You don't have the authority to kick back documents. You don't.
Especially if it's based on his specifications and his baseline.
Correct. No,
but like Fabian said, even if it's not the template, even if the template is not like their template, you know, it becomes very stressful. There should be a baseline. Should be, this is the baseline. This is what you work with. You include all mine, and anything that you want to add or you feel you need above this, you're entitled to put in, and that's it. I mean, why does it have to become such a stressful, complicated thing when you've given me your specification and I'm working off your baseline? Then why do they make it so stressful? You know, because remember now, these documents have to be approved for work to start.
Yeah, that is a challenge.
This challenge, it makes you think, am I in the right? And you know, I'm so passionate about what I do. But the documentation part becomes such a pain. It becomes such a pain because then you wonder why is there a baseline then? The baseline is supposed to say, okay, guys, yes, this is what I want. This is what I expect. This is what you need to work off and take it from there. I understand if there's gaps and things are left out and things are not covered in there. But if you've given me your baseline and told me this is what I want you to work with and I've covered yours and I've added in, then that should be sufficient. And then you work down the line. You know, to all these other little pre-toss risk assessments.
Sorry, guys. I'm amazed that you have a contractor selected for work and they're being dictated the frills and fanciness that needs to go into a document. I'm amazed. If that's the construction industry, then we are way behind and it's sad. I go back to Damien. Damien's raised his hand, Fabian.
Yes, yes.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening, guys. Thank you so much.
Good evening.
I'm really learning a lot. Hi, Fabian. Saide, thank you.
Hi, Damon.
Hi.
Yeah. So my interest for the most part is what goes on inside people's heads. And listening to Chantel, the amount of work we have to do is clearly even bigger than what I've thought. So my question, Fabian, listening to you speak, that generally speaking, you have clients who have baseline risk assessments which are really not good, or what the paper that they're written on, or there's a lot of copy and paste that happens. My question is, why do you think this actually happens? Why does it happen? Is it a case of time? Is it a case of a lot of work that has to go into these documents? What do you find is mostly the culprit for this result?
Damon, I think it's a combination of different aspects that you mentioned. So some of it is definitely time, time in the sense that one agent might be doing 10 different permits or 15 different permit applications. So it's a matter of pushing the permits, getting the permits approved for the client, firstly because work is standing. And also most of these agents get paid per permit that's approved. So if I'm getting 10,000 Rand per pop for 15 permits, that's 150,000 Rand. So I'm going to get it out as quick as possible because I need to get paid. That's the one aspect of it. The other is also the fact that there's no oversight from a lot of the clients. So if I am an agent, you're relying on me, you're paying me a amount of money to get these documents done and get them approved. Nobody else is verifying or vetting those documents before it goes out. And you trust me, and I submit it to the Department of Labor. They also don't have a very stringent vetting process on their part, or they have approved 4 of my permits already. What's going to be different on these baseline risk assessments and specifications? So those get approved as well quite easily. But the problem comes in is that it lands on our tables, and we, let's say the professionals, look at these documents with the vetting eye that we know, because we're vetting our own subcontractors' documentation on many occasions as well. So that's what happens. So again, it's a combination of different variables. It can be a time factor. It can be just no oversight from anybody to check the document quality. And then the stuff just gets submitted to contractors down the line. I mean, you get specifications that are copy and paste from another project to this project, but the scope is even different that we've identified. So it tells you what's happening in the industry. And these are supposed to be registered agents in the industry, but the quality that you see from these people is atrocious, to say it lightly. So that's just my viewpoint on a lot of the documents that I've checked and verified. And again, a lot of these agents are old in the game, so they feel that they know everything. There's nothing new that you can tell them. So when they submit a document, they feel, okay, I know this document is perfect, yet it can be shot full of holes. And that's the thing. So from my side, that's my viewpoint on the reasons behind it.
Thanks for that, Fabian.
No problem, Damien. I see Munya Radzi, your hand is up. Make aware. Mr. Munya Radzi, your hand is up. Vuzi Twele's hand is also up. Munya, your hand was up first. You can go ahead, please. I think we'll take the last 2 questions and then we'll have to close if there's nothing else from anybody else. Okay, Munya, you're not saying anything. You haven't unmuted your mic. Vusi, please go ahead. Unmute your mic and you can share or ask your question. All right, there's nothing coming through from the gentleman. If there's no other questions, I think we can close, Said, if you okay with that.
I'm okay, but I'd like to just ask that we do a session on the risk management process, because I'm a bit concerned that we have a very cumbersome process in South Africa that is, for me, totally unnecessary, and it's creating more. There's so many barriers than not looking at the actual work itself. I don't care whether somebody has a job to do and a permit to do. I've been paid to do a project, right? And we need to break this down. And I'm glad Damien put his pitch on. And I think Damien's going to be talking about moving safety from pure compliance. And this is exactly where we are so compliant driven that we miss the plot on what occupational health and safety, the profession's about. You know, we want to tick the box. We want to have these people called agents. Well, unfortunately, if an agent's in a position and they're not supporting the process, they're of no use to me. They add no value. I don't want them part of the project. Okay? And as I said, in all of my 30 years, that's the way it needs to be. You have to add value. For example, if I give you a document as a reference document, and that's what the agent document is, a reference document, they cannot come and object to my document. Okay? They've approved me. If there's within the contract, and I'd like, Chantal, if you don't mind there, just go back to your contract and check the contract in terms of documentation and what's required in terms of, yes, what's deliverable in terms of the agent specifications. And Fabian, I think this is one I'd like to run for our next sessions. I'm going to dust off our construction regulations. I'm going to look at if guys, they don't need to share the contracts, but just part of those specifications. Because even in Qatar, I'm dealing with the same scenarios under the construction, Qatar construction specifications, where we have what you call an agent, we have an engineer. Okay, and there's major challenges overcoming what they should be doing versus that supportive role.
Okay.
Okay.
That's good. We'll have that one next. That sounds good.
Excellent.
Okay. Is there any other comments or questions before we close? I think it was an excellent session and a good discussion thereafter. I see Vusi, your hand is up again. I gave you a chance just now, so your last chance. Please unmute and you can share. Otherwise, I'm going to have to cut this sharing session. Vusi? Please unmute. Hi, Vusi, go ahead, please.
Yes, you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me a chance. I just compliment everything that you have done for this group. And then for safety agents, can you please just invite one of them just to give us a clarity what they need from the safety officers on site? Yeah, thanks.
Okay, well, I'll speak to Fadley. Valley is our president. He is also a registered agent, so he'll be able to share quite detailed what the requirements is. But to be honest with everybody, I'll be honest about this issue. It's based on your preference. So every agent has his own likes and dislikes. It's what you feel and what you don't feel. There's nothing really cast in stone as far as the deliverables or But the requirements on the deliverables are based on clients' requirements and client-specific requirements of what their expectations are. And obviously that information goes into the contract, and that all goes in, the contract deliverables that you need to normally Exhibit E or Exhibit D, whatever exhibits they are part of the contract. And based on that, you need to comply with that. The issue as well is that you got a lot of the guys that are agents now that were previously working for principal contractors, big companies like the Hatches and what you call these, the Floors, etc. So now that the agents, they've gone through the vetting processes a lot of the time and they're very stringent. Now that the agents, they're doing the same process, which is making it very difficult for a lot of companies, a lot of managers out there to work, to get their documentation approved. Again, it's what he likes, what she don't like, etc., which also creates a whole lot of confusion. So we've also raised this discussion with the Department of Labor and with the SSEPCMP. I will also raise it between us to the technical committee because it is a point of concern. I know that from the CIDB perspective, they have already started on something to try and align it that it's much more simplified and more easily understood by everybody, but it's still in its early stages. I know, what's his name, Professor Smallwood was one of them that also wrote something to try and get everybody understanding what is the requirement for a baseline, the minimum criteria it should meet in order for it to be an accepted document, let's say. So it's still in early stages of all these relevant things that we implement.
So Fabian, thank you for that. So they are dictating what the baseline should be.
Mm-hmm.
No,
That's it.
sorry guys, sorry. Sorry, I'm coming back. Once the quarantine is over, I'm coming back to South Africa. I'm serious, guys. I'm amazed. The guys have taken 20 steps back in terms of a simple process. We no longer, that's why we have all these incidents. We have buildings collapsing on people because we're so focused with the bureaucratic nonsense, and we're not focusing on preventing incidents and saving lives.
That's true. That's true. Okay. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again, Saide Mansur from Mansur and Associates. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I know it's a Saturday and everybody wants to spend time with their families. We appreciate spending it with us. HSE Connection Points with us. You always connected. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, sir.
Take care.